Hello, everybody. Welcome to Cada Lunch and Learn. We have two speakers today, as you know, Dan and Sarah.
Hi.
Just a little housekeeping. We'll all be muted to avoid any background noise. I will encourage all of you to put your questions into the chat and we'll run through them later. So today, with John Lewis in the news, today we'll look at the future of the department store globally. We'll cover who's running effective department stores in 2023, if online has broken the traditional department store model, is there still a place for mass market, and what are the possibilities for luxury? But let's start with, what was it about the news of John Lewis that made you want to look into this topic?
Okay, well, thank you, Meha. I think we've been looking at John Lewis, through this year. There's been some ups and downs there. They've had some challenges, and as we've mentioned previously, the resurgence of Marks and Spencer in the UK has put more of a spotlight back on John Lewis partnership. But what we did want to start with was actually some positive news that we've seen from John Lewis, which is that they've recruited Paul Jones from Tesco, who will be joining as their head of brand and store experience. And he's a well-respected design and retail expert. Prior to the 12 years he spent at Tesco, he worked with Fitch and JHP and other design agencies, so has a very good and solid understanding of retail design, retail principles and best practices. And this seems like a really positive move for John Lewis. As far as we know, his focus will be on department stores rather than with Waitrose, at least initially. But where we think is interesting is that there's somebody with some real strong design credentials moving to John Lewis, which could help to move them forward in terms of the store experience, the store environment, and regaining some of their competitive edge, which I think they've lost over the last few years.
I think so, yes. And it's interesting as well because the news of his appointment was very well received, not just by the design community, by the store experience community, but by lots of retail watch sort of talking heads as well. And there was a lot of chatter about it on LinkedIn. And I think it was nice to see, again, there really is that desire and will for John Lewis to succeed. So we'll be watching and keeping in conversation with them. In terms of, that was the jumping off point, obviously. Yeah. One of the things we want to talk about is who's running department stores effectively in 2023. Dan's already mentioned M&S. Selfridges is always one to bear in mind, and we'll touch on it a bit later when we look at luxury more specifically. Looking more globally, El Corte Inglés seems to be doing very well. We've had a quote from the president there in July. They said that in 2022, their stores were busy with customers post-COVID. They have more than 1.5 billion visits. They've invested heavily in customer experience. They've had major refurbishments at more than 10 stores across Spain, including, I think, 4 in Madrid. So I think it's interesting to see someone very senior within the group, someone running it, talking about the the importance of the physical store, of the physical estate. Printemps is looking to open up 10 stores outside of France by 2030. So I'd say globally, there's Harrods is also always worth mentioning, always busy, always innovating, always doing new things, has plans for the top floor for the restaurants there. So I'd say globally, there's quite a lot of interesting.
Yeah, and I'd like to just expand on what Printemps are doing a bit, because I think what they're doing is will resonate with other department store brands. They are looking for different types of sites than they would have done traditionally. So they're looking at smaller sites. They're looking at more focused offers. They have a site that will open in 2024 in New York, in the financial district on Wall Street. And that's going to be, it's about 70,000 square feet, but it's still a lot smaller than a traditional full department store, full Printemps model. And I think what's interesting there also is that they have used their very small site in Deauville in northern France, which is a coastal town which is an escape from Paris for a lot of people, to make sure that they are really testing how this mix may change. So what they've done in Deauville, which opened in May, I think, of this year, was that they've scrapped branded areas and brand counters. They've gone through a completely cross-merchandised approach. So they're really trying to think about a retail journey and the retail experience as a Printemps-owned experience rather than a succession of shop-in-shops or stores. And also what they've done in Deauville, and maybe they'll do this in New York, although I think it'll be a bit harder, is they've made sure that the brands that they're stocking in Deauville are not available elsewhere in that town. So they're not trying to overlap with brand stores that are there or any other retailers. But the CEO has said that the New York store will be a large concept store rather than a department store. And there will again be no leased shop. So it will be much more as a front-on experience. So what we think is interesting about that is one, that a very large, very traditional retailer, albeit one owned by the Qatari royal family as Harrods, so it's got the money to experiment, is doing something quite brave and is also experimenting with larger formats, which is what we've seen Marks and Spencer do smaller formats, which is what we've seen Marks and Spencer do in the UK as well.
Yes, and I think the other interesting thing about that is it just shows again that physical retail is something that requires thought, requires investment, and requires also that curation. They've decided as a brand, this is what we want to sell in the store. We are going to be different. We are going to differentiate ourselves by effectively saying this is the printemps edit.
Yeah. Yes.
It's taking a risk in a sense, but arguably it's taking a risk simply to stock anything. I think it's also worth remembering. We talk about online, we talk about the rest of online, but 75% of retail sales are still happening in store.
Yes.
So it's worth remembering that. Has online broken the traditional department store model? Possibly. The department store had become slightly homogenous, slightly uninteresting before COVID, when we obviously had the opportunity to buy purely from online. Other retailers also had started catering for those things that department stores were the only people who sold things like children's school uniform, for example. You can now pick that up anywhere. Homewares, difficult to find elsewhere. Say 20 years ago, now you can buy a cushion or your bedding from Zara or from H&M where you're picking up a t-shirt, and those ranges are credible add-ons. And they're working well for those brands. So I think there's been a bit of an encroachment as well.
I think certainly, there was definitely, the growth of online put a lot of pressure on department stores, and we've seen in the UK, Debenhams and BHS failing. We've seen House of Fraser become part of Fraser's group, which is actually a positive story, thinking differently about department stores again. But there was certainly pressure, and I think certainly the downshifting in size of footprint that we're seeing, I think is an indication that there is definitely a fairly permanent shift to some functional purchases moving online, and maybe needing to showroom some of that and try and capture that online customer yourself as a brand. But that, the days of needing to carry large stocks of awkward items is probably in the past. And that's, a more focused retail experience thinks much more about what the customer wants to get out of it, rather than what you as a retailer, or your brands, who are your tenants, want to get out of it, is likely to be the right way forward.
Yeah, and something that's based a bit more on how customers behave these days. So a nice example is Nike and Sweaty Betty as well, which I'll come on to. And both brands have decided they've realised this, that people have their phones. They're effectively an extension of our arms. Their shoppers, customers are walking around with their phone, not even necessarily in their pocket or in their bag, it's in their hand. So both brands have thought about what can we do to improve the physical store experience based on the fact that the customer is holding the phone. So for example, Nike, you walk into the Westfield Mall, and as long as you've got the Nike app, you'll get a little notification saying, welcome, perhaps you'll consider a visit. So you might have gone to Westfield with no intention of going to the Nike store, but now you've got an incentive, you've got a reason to visit. You get there, you activate your app on this big interactive tabletop display, and then the content that appears will be based on your activity. So it's almost like giving you a personalized guide to the store based on your history, based on your preferences. And there's all sorts of other additions to do with, your sizing appearing if you want to try something on, and taking out the little aggravations and irritations and the things that you never knew might have bothered you, and just making it very personalized and seamless and improving the in-store environment. And likewise, Sweaty Betty, which has moved to tap to pay. I was at this breakfast event this morning and learned all about this. Tap to pay across its store network, introduced the Battersea concept store, so removing the POS barrier. It's freeing up staff to really engage with customers in that physical store environment. It's obviously making things quicker. It's obviously helping with queuing as well. But it's also just freeing them up to think differently about how those interactions are going to play out and what's interesting about them. And they also get to gather data on customer behaviour that allows them to improve. It's an omni-channel. It's an omni-channel experience really, but it's it's really optimizing that store estate.
And I guess it's a similar model to what we've seen with the Apple Store. And what we actually, if you think of the Apple Store, what it really is actually a very good showroom experience. Apart from a few accessories, nothing that is retailed off the sales floor is the product that you're taking off the shelf. They're displaying those products. They're very highly staffed, and they are that service model is that there's no counters, as we all know, and you go to a member of staff who then resolves your purchase, and the purchase is brought to you. So it's a very refined model that is a world away from the traditional counter service model. And I think that's something that again can begin to free up the ways the department store can think. Also, but some of that will be dependent on the evolution of either the use of shopping shops or how shopping shops work. Because why would I, as a customer, want to make multiple separate purchases as I move through a department store if I can gather those all in one place, or if there's a way of making that easier for me? And I'm sure that that's something that a lot of department stores are working on right now to really try and understand how that could kind of improve.
Absolutely. And what about luxury? What's the? We've looked at mass market. We've looked at some lessons that could be applied from mass market, albeit high end, perhaps mass market brand, but could be useful in a department store.
Well, I think that Printemps doing what they're doing is interesting because they're firmly in that high end part of the market, but also what I think is happening. La Samaritaine, which opened during COVID, it was scheduled to open just before, but then it got delayed by about a year in Paris. There's a very strong own brand position to have taken from LVMH, who basically created or recreated over a 15-year period this grand old department store to be an LVMH temple, which is gathering all their brands together and really thinking about what that experience can be from their point of view. I think that gathering of brands is something that department stores do very well, which is really all about curation. And what I think luxury department stores need to do is to recognise that curation is their real strength. Because why would you go to a department store rather than go to Bond Street, for example, where if you're a luxury customer, you can have the full experience of each brand's kind of flagship store in a key city. But in fact, the strength is that by choosing and simplifying and editing the products on offer from each brand by the correct buy, effectively, Selfridges or Harrods or whoever we're talking about, has the power to really help to focus down for customers on what is popular, what they're looking for, and how they can find it, and take control of that customer experience as well.
And of course, it's that curation again. It wouldn't be here under our roof if there wasn't something special and exciting and interesting about it, certainly in the luxury market. I suppose the other thing about luxury, I was reading an article the other day in the Figaro, is it's cyclical. It's been growing at 6-7% on average every year for the last 10 years, 2012, 2022. And during that time, apparently the number of millionaires globally has almost doubled. So what luxury has on its side is that there is a ready market for its products. Also, it seems to be willing as an industry, as a sector, to really invest in brand building and marketing and communication, put on the most fantastic, earth-shatteringly glittering shows, and whether that's brilliant for the environment is another matter entirely, but it's willing to understand that it needs to spend the money to have the creativity to get the airtime, to get the press, to get the attention that it deserves, and that all that will build into brand building and build into driving sales. It's also unusual because it comes up with these global bestsellers. And then if there's a downturn in one part of the economy around the world, it can shift its focus elsewhere. And the same product, whether it's the bag of the moment or something else, or the dress of the moment, will have applicability in those different global markets.
And I suppose the challenge for a department store brand, a global department store brand, or one that has global ambitions, is to recognise what are you trying to do with that expansion? Is that we know that from talking to Harrods, for example, that they would never try and replicate that London store anywhere else in the world because it can't be done. The uniqueness of Harrods is Brompton Road. But what they are looking at is what would those capsule experiences be if they go to the Middle East, if they go to Asia, if they go to the US, or wherever they might want to go. What parts of Harrods would they want to take with them? And so it's again, but the Printemps example is interesting. It'd be great to see what happens on Wall Street next year, because it's probably a tenth of the size of what they would traditionally see as a department store within their estate. But they're focusing very much on customer experience and their précis of what they think the right product mix is going to be there.
Relying on what customers understand of their brand, again, to curate, and a bit like Saks Fifth Avenue, which seems to be sort of flexing the power of its brand. So it's developing its Fifth Avenue Club, another location in Charleston, which will be a very particularly chosen destination. It reminds me of what people like Soho House are doing in the Cotswolds. And that's becoming a destination in its own right, with lots of other high-end luxury brands like the Lakes by You and so on. We've gone out of department stores here, but
I think you make an important point.
That location where customers go and creating something for them that may actually have nothing to do with the core retail, where the business started.
It's experience.
It's an offer and experience.
Experience is what I was
that is valuable.
Going to say, and that's what we're seeing. Harrods in the last 2 to 3 years have invested a lot of money in partnerships with well-known chefs and bringing restaurant brands into the building in London, and they're increasing that and continuing, as you mentioned, touched on the 4th floor is set to become a major new dining destination within Harrods and within London over the next sort of probably 2 or 3 years. I'm not sure what the timeline looks like. It might even be a bit quicker, but they see that actually by using hospitality, you can draw customers in, you can get them to extend their dwell time, and you can drive repeat visits. So a great hospitality offer, and we know that's all right at the very top end of the market, but that principle of really thinking about how hospitality can act as a magnet, and that then can get people in the mood for retail purchases and for thinking about spending more and more time engaging with your department store brand, seems like a really compelling one for the mid-market to look at as well.
Well, absolutely, and that's where I know Meher wants us to stop to leave time for questions, but if you think about it, that's where the whole department store story started. Instead of going to a shop to buy a milliner's to buy a hat, for example, as a middle-class woman, you could go to Selfridges with a view to seeing what was there, to having a look around, to spending time, to having that moment, that sort of discovery experience. Without necessarily knowing.
And it's maybe that kind of that palatial experience. There are only ever going to be a very few stores that can be at that absolute level, but that experience of offering something different, that a department store when you walk into it doesn't feel homogenized, doesn't feel like it's the same beauty hall that you could find anywhere in the world on the ground floor.
Exactly, this brand will be here and so on.
There needs to be more energy put into how each brand can tailor its experience. And just to finish off on that, was actually something we wanted to touch on, Frasers, and the fact that they've taken their House of Fraser brand and are now looking at how they, a bit like LVMH but at a very different level in the market, how they bring the brands that the Frasers Group owns together under one roof and create a destination and a home for all of those brands that operate at a very different market levels. So from a value point of view, they'll have Sports Direct, and from a luxury point of view, they'll have Flannels, which is their own luxury, fashion-driven kind of luxury editor of a brand. So there'll be a real blend and a real mix, but they're taking space and looking at space which has been empty for 2 to 3 years, retail space that currently no one else knows what to do with, and they are working out ways to make that work. So I think that there's some very good examples of innovation happening in the sector.
Yeah, and I was just going to bring it straight back to mass market, again with Marks & Spencer, which is doing some really interesting brand curation across apparel. I can't say anything I don't know about men's apparel, but ladies' apparel has become really interesting. They've brought in brands, that third-party brands. So it's becoming more interesting simply because there's more interesting fashion in there. Also across beauty, where they've got the odd external brands now, so it's a destination in itself.
Absolutely.
Sorry,
amazing.
We overran there.
That's perfect. No, it's interesting stuff. I'll give people a couple of minutes to put in their questions, but I have a question in the meantime. What is the one thing that you're both, through all this research that you've done, and I've been watching you obviously do research over the last few weeks, what is the one thing that you're seeing that as you said, in H&M Home, I would choose, like, you could choose to go there instead of going to the department store to get your linens or whatever it is. What is it that's happening in non-department store retail that needs to or would be effective in department store retail to uplift the actual, just that small subset of department stores? What is it that needs to be applicable, or what can be applied? What principles, anything? Because there seems to be a lot of things that are not, that they are, there's stuff that's available in regular retail that you wouldn't see in a department store, and vice versa.
I think you mentioned homewares, which is interesting because what the strength that I see that H&M or Zara Home or any of those kind of pure play home retailers, even Soho Home, which is part of Soho House, which now is selling fixtures and lifestyle products that sit alongside the aesthetic that you would find in one of their members clubs or weekend retreats. And I think what they have is they have complete control over their product because it's own brand, and that allows them to tell a much more coherent story, which is again to bang on about plans once more, but to take it back to that is that it's the brand that owns that experience, not the brand that sublets space that then has shop in shops. And I think one of the challenges that happens in a lot of homeware is that it becomes a very large, if it's not John Lewis where they're doing it all themselves, pretty much everywhere else, homewares and department stores is a series of shop in shops, a series of people selling competing products that are alongside each other. So if you go into a beds department in a large department store, you'll see 10, 12, 15 bed brands with their own shop in shop selling you a competing product from one of the others. Now, I think where and this is easy to say and very hard to change because the business model has to change, which is that if you as a brand were curating what you thought were really the best 5 or 10 beds for your customers, whoever that customer group is, with a key understanding of what the differences were from those different brands, but they were presented as a collection from the department store brand to customers, that would be a much more compelling and interesting journey, which for customers, but which would also help those customers to understand why those beds have been put together. Not that we've just got a bunch of stuff that's from different competing brands who would like to take your money, and all of them are going to tell you that their bed is right for you. So I think that's where homewares and own label stores win at the moment, because they can create a beautiful story. They can use really strong visual merchandising, drawing broad categories of products together that makes sense for a homeware purchaser that just isn't possible in that traditional shop-in-shop or tenanted department store model. So I think that's the main advantage that independents have, or that small own brands have, is that they're completely in control of the curation and of the product mix.
I also wonder whether there's an element of knowing the customer well enough. If the customer's got an app, are they going to be more likely to make that sort of sideways leap from apparel to homewares? I know for myself, because I have the H&M app, it's very easy for me to use. So I will buy things from H&M because of the ease of use. I also know that I don't like it, I can return it, but in reality, I don't do that. I don't have to do that, but it makes it very easy for me. And I think Dan's right as well. It would almost be better if they had a sort of good, better, best. These are the 3 beds we recommend, and we therefore can offer them to you at very competitive prices because we buy so many of them. The sort of Aldi Lidl model of not having much choice, but therefore being able to offer excellent prices on it.
Yeah, and I think the other thing, not moving away from let's not Inditex and Zara and H&M are huge retail behemoths as well. So they've got the money to do this and to roll out this category because they see it as a long-term growth area for them. But the other thing is to think that department stores could do is to begin to curate in a slightly different way. So as well as providing well-known, well-established brands and luxury brands, is actually bringing in interesting smaller brands at an earlier point, trying to act as an incubator, creating a point of difference for them, bringing brands that might be online only or might only have one store in one particular area, and offering them a foothold or a leg up, if you like, into a larger retail space to actually present their products and tell their stories to a broader range of customers. And I think that innovation then allows the department store brand to talk with authority about their curation, their collection, their connection with these small brands, as well as the large brands which you need to act as a draw, that you will actually, you will then help those producers to grow, and you will give your customers a broader choice or a broader range of options.
Yes, and provided you have the best buyers in the business working for you, then they'll be the ones sniffing out which are those brands that are the ones followed. I think Marks and Spencer, again, they're either invested in or actually acquired some ladies apparel brands, and like you say, giving them that leg up, giving them that ability to scale.
Yeah, they've taken that from Next. They've seen what Next is doing and realised that it's a good way of giving customers what they want and making money. But it's giving customers what they want is the place to start. That's the right thing to do for sure.
Wow. All right. That and more. Great. Okay. I have another question here. What is happening? Are we seeing the same changes all over the world for example, Asia?
Well, broadly, yes. Particularly if we look at luxury, then I think that, as Sarah was touched on, there's an international luxury market which behaves in pretty similar ways. Different products, obviously, are more popular in some territories to others, but there is, there's a lot of positivity there, and there's a lot of resilience there. I think in the mid-market, department stores occupy slightly different places depending in the marketplace, depending on which territory you're in. For example, in South Korea, because retail grew very fast, real estate for retail is probably a better way of putting it, grew very fast in the 80s and 90s and the early 2000s. So there are a lot of purpose-built department stores there that serve everybody from mass market to premium. So there's a different, they occupy a different place in the world than you would expect them to in other territories, certainly if you're thinking about Europe. Very large department stores from brands like Shinsegae and Lotte and Hyundai, which can be, well over 1 million square feet, 10, 15 stories high, and full of product at all different types of price points for every different customer. So I think, there are cultural things that mean that this is not a homogenous market. But I still think that we come back to the idea of smaller formats that get you closer to people would seem like, as a more general point, something that's going to be more useful for brands to adopt, is that, to break out of being the temple in a capital city and to bring your brand closer to others, then what can you do with a 10th or a 20th or a 5th of the space that you would traditionally operate?
A bit like, it makes me think of the residence, the Harrods residence in Shanghai, which is a building which caters for very high-end customers and provides them with a very personal level of service. It's not a stock, it's not a shoppable stock site that holds lots of stock. It's there to cater to customers at a very high level, and it's really all about the Harrods brand and what can the Harrods brand offer.
And that customer experience of bringing certain fashion collections, for example, to the city or to those potential customers, and sharing that in a very comfortable environment, and giving them the time to browse and to buy, and recognizing that brand has that has that strength and the trust with international customers to be valued in that way.
Okay, thank you. We have one question from Angela. Taking out London, is the high street dead or is it evolving? Nice. I like that.
It's evolving. I don't think it's dead. I think it's very challenging for sure. It's challenging even in parts of London as well. But I think talking, as I talked about phrases earlier on, there are people looking at how to really use spaces that have been dormant. But there is also going to be some harsh realities that there are some spaces that are no longer suitable. That there will be a 60 or 100,000 square foot department store in a market town that just cannot sustain that type of store anymore, because there will probably now be an out of town shopping centre there, and there will be the internet, which is everywhere. So there are too many choices for the way customers need to purchase for some of those large destination sites to be completely repurposed. But maybe they become repurposed into office space with a ground floor retail, or maybe they become hospitality. There's all of those kind of options. It's going to be a long slog though. It's not an easy fix at all.
No, and I mean, it depends on all sorts of local factors as well, doesn't it? Ease of access, ease of parking. And you have to get to 15 minutes today, which is a whole different topic. But evolving would be, I think, the answer. Certainly, if I look at my own local high street.
Fantastic. If there are any other questions, I don't want to keep anyone later than their lunch break allows. Thank you everyone for joining. We appreciate this. There's a quick question from Nick Ford. Is there a major difference between regions in the UK?
In a word, yes, probably.
Yeah, they'll be buying. There'll be differences in competition. There'll be differences in shopping habits. There'll be range differences. Obviously broadly similar, but
the role of retail parks attracting customers in such a way that local high streets are being neglected, and should councils look at parking, all that sort of thing. What's the interplay between the retail? Marks and Spencer, for example, moving its sites often from high streets 2 retail parks. Hotel Chocolat started opening have retail parks, which is new for them. It's the first sort of step into that, but this recognition that customers can relax when they get there. So I wonder if, out of London is the main difference in London and out of London.
But I think there's also that place still within this, and we haven't touched on this at all because we were talking much more about brands and much more about the scale of large brands. Is that there are still some very successful independent department stores across the UK that understand their customer in a way that a national brand simply can't, and that can compete very well with people like John Lewis and Marks and Spencer's by knowing what those customers want, by understanding the local makeup of the population, and by working with local producers. So a lot of what we were talking about innovation is actually happening in those family-run or independent stores that might have been there for 50, 100 or 150 years. Gerald in Norwich is one I'm thinking of that we've worked with on several projects over the last 7 years, and they understand their part of the UK so very well, and they understand their customers that they are they can't be completely insulated from competition, but they are much better at serving that local community and driving customer loyalty within that community than any national brand could hope to be, because that's where they live. It's what they know. It's in their blood almost.
Yeah, that I agree. Gerald's is beautiful. Okay, we're a little bit over. I'm so sorry for keeping everybody, but thank you so much for joining. We appreciate it. I hope you enjoyed today. The link will be out on YouTube. Podcast will be out soon as well on Spotify and Amazon Podcasts and Podbean. If you want to get in touch with us and talk more about department stores or retail or grocery, anything, email us at enquiries@cada.co.uk, or you can get in touch with us on any of the social channels. We'd love to hear from you. Always up for a coffee. Dan and Sarah are always up for meeting everybody. We hope to see you next time. Thank you so much, and see you soon.
Thanks, everyone.
Thank
Bye
you.
now.
Bye-bye.